moderator. Okay, so the first candidate to respond will get 60 seconds, the second candidate gets 60 seconds, and then the first candidate gets a chance to rebut 30 seconds. All right, so the first question is going to go to Ian. If elected, what will be your highest priority?
Thank you. And by the way, thanks for putting this on. It's been great. Highest priority, I think, as I mentioned, the federal government, it taxes people and then it uses that money to destroy innocent life across the world. It regulates businesses into the ground. It drives them away from this country. And I mean, there's so much damage. We all are very familiar with what the federal government does to people. I think that we have no benefits from the federal government. New Hampshire, spends a bunch of money into the federal government and is just controlled as a result of that. So I think we'd be better off on our own. We could be an independent country and open, trade to the rest of the world and get along just fine and be able to take care of ourselves much better because we could keep all of our money here in this community instead of having a bunch of killers and bureaucrats in the federal government take it from us.
My highest priority would be to turn around the huge damage and harm that's happened to New Hampshire under the Free State and Tea Party auspices of the last 2 years. And I believe that before we can get to doing really important things like getting to a fair income tax based on the ability to pay, we have to reverse the decline that we see with this current O'Brien speakership. My other goal will be to increase civility. I agree with Mr. Robertson, who pointed out the best governor we've ever had, at least in my 40 years, is Walter Peterson. And all Republicans used to be problem solvers. And that's why I went to Concord, to become a problem solver, to try and fix things that needed fixing. So that might be my highest priority.
Okay, so I get a rebuttal? Yeah, so I think that there are some serious problems as well with New Hampshire, but ultimately with the federal government, and all of its diktats that they hand down from on high, they're not doing us any favors. And I like to ask people what it is that's so great about the federal government, and I've yet to get a really responsive answer from anyone on that. They just seem to be an abusive parent, essentially.
Okay, so the next question will be, you'll get the first chance to respond. What is your position on the voter ID?
I think the voter ID law that was passed 2 years ago and that was passed in a similar form in 2006, 2007 is voter repression. That's all. It has nothing to do with what is, making sure that there's no voter fraud. That's been investigated carefully by the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office here in Keene, amongst other places, and they found no instances of voter fraud. It's a trumped-up charge based on rumor and innuendo and ideology of the people who decided to do it. The Constitution would guide me, and that's the 26th Amendment, which says if you're 18 years old and you're an American citizen, you have a right to vote anywhere in any federal election. That should be our criteria. What happened, I'm afraid, is we've lost a lot of trust in this country. And I'm not sure we can run a democracy, and I'm not sure we have a democracy, but you can't run a democracy without trust. You need to be trusting people. The youngest voters, the ones who are being repressed systematically this time around, are the ones who turn out the least. I think we need to encourage them, not discourage them.
I agree with Chuck. I think that I've never voted with an identification in New Hampshire, and I don't intend to. New Hampshire has some of the best voting, I guess you want to call them laws or regulations, but they're very open. You can go in New Hampshire and vote and register on the same day. Originally, where I come from in Florida, you've got to do that, I think, 30 or 90 days in advance of an election. So it's a much more open system here, and that encourages people to get involved. Somebody can think at the last minute, you know what, I do want to vote. They can go in the last minute, and they literally can. It's not a problem here. I think that's a good thing.
I'm not going to rebut something that doesn't need rebuttal.
Okay. All right. So, Ian, what is your preferred tax policy?
I'm a voluntarist. That means I believe that all human interaction should be on a consensual basis, and I think that taxes are generally not based in consent. That I think that humans should be interacting consensually, so therefore I can't support any sort of taxation.
I believe that we ought to have fair taxation based upon the ability to pay. I have sponsored several income tax bills, including a homestead exemption. I've supported Mr. Robertson's attempt to get rid of this constitutional provision which makes it impossible to get progressive taxes in New Hampshire. I'm also, I've already filed a bill to increase gas taxes, I think 10 cents per year, to pay for our bridges and highways, because I think it's a community responsibility. And I think it's irresponsible for us to put off the necessary maintenance on important parts of our infrastructure. So I will support a gas tax, which unfortunately is regressive, but I will do my best to turn the tax picture around to make it fair based on the ability to pay.
If there's a good community program like a bridge or helping poor people or whatever it is we're talking about, then people will support those programs voluntarily, as I do when I give money to local charities. So anything that's a good idea will be supported by people on a consensual basis. We don't need to have the threat of force behind a community program, because people do care about one another, and I think that we can do things without the threat of violence, which is what taxes are, because if you don't pay the taxes, they'll come steal your house from you or possibly put you in a cage.
Okay, now we'll open it up to the rapid fire questions. So David, who are you asking?
Hi, I'm going to ask the same question I had been asking you.
To both candidates?
Yes, if I can.
Sure.
Mr. Robertson, I think, said that it was a stupid question to have one issue. I personally have one issue in the presidency, and that has to do with bombing innocents overseas. And if a bomb was dropping on your house, Mr. Robertson, I think that would be the #1 issue.
Is he asking a question?
But anyway,
Let's ask the question,
this is my question.
Could he tell me which president wouldn't do that?
Well, let's show the two candidates up here some respect and let them finish their portion.
I heard
And
my
after
name
the
mentioned.
forum is over, then you guys can discuss that as much as you want and at length.
Okay. Who would you be voting for president, and what is the #1 issue for you?
Who are you asking?
He's asking both of you.
You can go first, Mr.
Okay, I'm happy to go first. I believe that if Romney were elected president, that we would be very quickly at war in Iran. I believe that we would be using drones as well as having feet on the ground. And I think I deplore as well Obama's policy about war, but I understand that things could be a lot worse, and I think they would be a lot worse if Mr. Romney were president.
Hear, hear.
I don't believe in the federal government, obviously, so, but if I did, I wouldn't vote for either of those two. I'm not going to vote for people who aggress or advocate the aggression against other human beings. I'll be casting my vote for none of the above, which actually is going to be a tallied vote this year, thanks to the New Hampshire Liberty Party at nh-liberty.info. Is where you can go to learn more about that. But I believe our moderator here is actually running for vice president as the none of the above option. So if you write NOTA in on the presidential ballot, you'll have your vote counted for none of the above, and I think that's the appropriate secessionist vote.
Okay, Ms. Tilton, who are you asking?
Mr. Freeman,
Okay.
I wonder what you would do with members of the community who don't choose to get along with everybody else.
Like criminals, for instance?
Criminals or people who pound on their, spouses or get into a bar fight.
Sure. I think that, I support the idea of a peace officer, for instance, which is what law enforcement was originally until they became law enforcement officers, where it was their role to restore the peace, to remove somebody who's violent from a situation. I think that I don't have a problem with the idea of violent people having, some sort of a penalty for what they do. What I have a problem with is that in this state and all across the country, innocent, peaceful people who've never harmed another human being, whether it's because they had a plant in their pocket or a chemical.
I'm not talking about that.
Right.
So would you be in favor of paying for a peace officer?
I think that anything that's a good idea will be supported on a consensual basis. So yes, I would absolutely pay for protection services, and I think a lot of other people would as well.
So if I don't hang out in bars, or she pointed at
Yes,
me.
you can ask this question. Who are you asking?
So if,
Ian?
Mr. Freeman, so if I don't hang out in bars where I'm worried about having a peace officer, and I've got a fireproof house, and so I'm not worried about the fire, so I don't have to pay that part of my
You don't pay.
tax, right? I just don't pay.
Well, I don't support the idea of coercive taxation, so I think that you should support things on a voluntary basis as a member of a community, you know, I think there's some level
But
of
I don't want
responsibility
He
there.
doesn't want
Well,
to.
if you want to be an old curmudgeon, then that's, you know, that's your choice. And then maybe
It's called young and
maybe,
greedy.
maybe your community members would not want to do business with you, or maybe they wouldn't want to support you because you didn't want to support them. I think that most people are good and that they will help others.
So you're gonna publish how much every person pays in taxes?
So they know.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, how would they know I didn't pay taxes?
I'm not even proposing taxes, so I'm not sure we've.
Well,
we're
or a
even communicating.
volunteer.
How would they know if he?
Do you know
So
how
people
much?
talk. Well, we have the internet, and so people can.
Do you know how much I give to the United Way?
It's really, I don't know. I'm sure I could look
Okay.
that up if I wanted.
No, you couldn't.
All right, so that's the last question for Ian, so go ahead.
Yes,
Steve.
Mr. Weed. Part of the New Hampshire advantage is not just the lack of sales or income tax, but it's also the slightly lower gas in New Hampshire, slightly lower fireworks prices, slightly lower alcohol prices, slightly lower beer prices. And a lot of businesses are based around the borders, including in Cheshire County, that focus on selling these items to people that live all over the country that visit here. And so why are you proposing both an increase in the beer tax and the gas tax when that will it'll close companies, it'll make people lose their jobs, it'll hurt the economy? Why are you proposing to do that to Cheshire County?
That question sounds just like the people who wear orange badges to testify against me when I propose a tax, every time I've done it. I proposed a luxury sales tax based on the ability to pay. But I think I do that because I understand that there's a community responsibility to fund necessary services. And I think it's a tragedy that we suck the Vermonters and the Massachusetts and the Maine people over here to buy our cigarettes and to buy things at a little cheaper price. And it helps our state to do that. I think it's crazy. But you're probably quite right. With this existing corrupt system, it's probably pretty dangerous to do that. However, I do believe taxes are important and necessary, and without taxes, and if it were all voluntary, I know I've been told my whole life that you should behave on the basis of self-interest. And if people behave on the basis of self-interest, they don't voluntarily give up anything. So I think that you people are a little bit naive about what you're going to.
What do you mean by you people?
You people.
That's kind of offensive.
What it means, those people who
Males?
think we ought
What
to
are you
get rid
saying?
of government and not have taxes.
I certainly am not you people. I find that offensive, sir.
Okay, we have room.
Very
We
sorry.
have one more question available for Mr. Weed. Any further questions? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Weed, I am concerned, you know, with this talk about, to me, it's like anarchy. And I wonder, do you think that if we ever had sort of anarchy that took over, would we all have to then go buy guns and be armed?
Great question. If we were all equal, I think I'd be an anarchist. We're not. Since we're not all equal, and some of us are very wealthy, and some of us are very frightened, and some of us are very insecure, guns, private armies, and that sort of way would be the way it would be handled if there were anarchy. But I would point out, just theoretically, anarchy is the most optimistic of political systems. It says that nobody needs to be in charge, and that people will behave more often than not, and probably many times more often than not, in a decent and fair manner. I don't believe a corrupt society that has such great inequality can do that.
Okay, great. So now we have time for each candidate gets a 60-second closing remarks. So Ian would go first.